How's it going, everyone? Hopefully you're doing well. Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be going through every single tech tree line, and I'm going to say whether they're good, bad, whether you should avoid them, whether you should definitely go down them, and kind of just the ease of use of all of them. This isn't going to be a rating on what's the best tier 10 for each line, but how the line actually progresses and if it's actually enjoyable or not. This will be mainly aimed at newer players, of course. If you are an experienced player, or you know the game a little bit more than say a beginner would, then I will still be going through some of the tanks, and I will say on those tanks whether or not, yes, you can play these, but you are going to need a little bit more experience if you actually want to get the most out of them. Okay, just before we get into the video, I am going to say that I have made a chart, so because this video is really long, if you don't want to watch it all, or you don't have the time to watch it all, you can skip through to the different chapters that you'd be interested in down below with the timestamps, but also there is a chart that I've created. You can go to the link, it will be in the description or in the pinned comment, so you can have a quick look at exactly what's what if you just don't even want to watch the video and just look at that, if that's easier for you. So yeah, enjoy the rest of the video. Now, we aren't going to include artillery. If you want to play artillery, then just pick a line and go down it, basically. Anything other than the French line and you're basically fine. Yeah, this is actually going to be about tanks that go forwards rather than reverse at the start of the game. So let's start off with the FV 4005. This is actually a good line. All of these tanks are really, really good. And if you don't like these kind of derpy guns that the 4005 has, the entire line is not like that. The 4005 is completely different to the Conq. The Conq actually gets some really, really nice guns that you can use. You know what? We're going to put myself down to the bottom right so we can actually see all the gun stats and whatnot. So as you can see here, we get some options when it comes to the guns. We're just going to max this out quickly. As you can see, you're going to need to get tracks, but you don't need to get another turret, which is nice. But you get the choice of two guns. This is the tortoise gun, and this is the Hesh gun. And when I say the tortoise gun, I do mean the tortoise gun. It gets slightly less DPM than the tortoise because it is more mobile and has a turret. A bit like how the E4 gets slightly less DPM than the E3, for example. But it still has all the characteristics of the tortoise gun. It is very, very good. The only problem is that you don't actually have any armor on this thing. This tank is basically made out of paper. However, you see this gun mantlet? As it goes down, all of this lower bit of the gun mantlet is about 340 millimeters thick. So if you are going to shoot at one of these things, do not just think that you can right click, left click, because if it goes into the mantlet, you're probably going to end up bouncing. And it is super annoying when it does happen. Right next to the gun, either side, that's fine. But either side, as soon as you get to kind of this point here where it kind of bulges out, anything right of that and left of this one, forget about it. You're probably just going to bounce. It's about 300 millimeters thick around there, and then 340 at the bottom. So it is super, super troll. So if you're going to shoot it, go underneath or go for the hull, go for anywhere else other than the gun mantlet. But overall, you can't really go wrong with the Conq. It's a very, very nice tank. And of course, you can use the Hesh gun, which is going to have 600 alpha with 260 millimeters of penetration as standard. Or you fire Hesh, which is going to give you 200 pen with 770 alpha. So it's kind of like a mini 4005 if you use that gun. But then if you use the tortoise gun, it's just like a mobile tortoise, just minus all the armor. And also the Charioteer is just a beautiful tank. The Challenger is fine. The Achilles is fine. All of these tanks are really, really nice, actually. And you're not going to be spending too long at tier 4 and 5. So I'm not really going to include these so much in like my kind of conclusion if the grind is good, but these are fine as well. Then we move on to the Badger. Now the Badger itself is a good tank. The Tortoise is an amazing tank. The Tortoise is actually better than the Badger tier for tier, just purely because you have such a wide gun arc on the Tortoise compared to the Badger. You can actually go around corners and hide your weak spots, basically, and it makes the Tortoise very, very hard to deal with. The AT-15 is, I would say, okay. It's not as good as the Tortoise, and it is like a mini Tortoise, but your weak spots are very weak when it does come to it. And then you get the two absolutely stinkers in the line. This is awful. This is awful. I mean, the 88, if this is on like levels of bad, the 88 is on about a 2 out of 10 for a level of, like, good. And the 87 is on about a 3 out of 10. It is awful. They are not completely useless, otherwise they'll be 1 out of 10. But, like, as soon as you expose your weak spot, like, just look at it. But if you actually want to use the gun, then it's such an awkward tank to play. And it's so slow. I mean, okay, I didn't have the engine on it. And the gun isn't awful. Man, it is. Just don't. Honestly, don't pick this as your first line to go down, okay? This line, not too bad, okay, to go down. But maybe just stop at the Conway if you don't want the 4005. Because the 4005 is really just... It's like land artillery, basically. I wouldn't really... It's funny, but it gets old very, very quickly. And it's like, yeah, okay. I'm a bit bored of it now. Because you can't... You're so inflexible with 4005. And then we have the Super Conqueror. The Super Conqueror line. It's honestly one of the best lines in the game once you get to tier 8. Because you basically get the best tier 8 heavy, the best tier 9 heavy, and then online with the best tier 10 heavy if you're talking about tech tree only. Yeah. These are really, really good. But again, you got to go through the Black Prince. You got to go through the Churchill 7. And you have to go through the Churchill 1. The Matilda's great. But the Churchill 1, the Churchill 7, and the Black Prince not so much. But these two especially are poo. They are, I'm talking like 1.5 out of 10. And then this is maybe like a 3. Because at least the Black Prince can kind of side scrape. Although it just gets penned to the turret instantly. So kind of useless. So do I recommend this line to be your first line? No. Again, this is going to be for people that are a little bit more experienced in the game and actually know what they're doing and know what they're getting themselves in for. I mean, I suppose if you do know what you're getting yourself in for, then you could just go down this line no matter how experienced you are. But you're going to have a lot of pain and suffering in these 3 tanks, especially in the Black Prince, because it's going to be a while until you unlock the tier 8. So, yeah. But I mean, the Kranvagn is so good. The Kranvagn's the best heavy tank in tier 8, like hands down. The Centurion Action 10, this line is beautiful. Everything about this line is just perfection. Tier 9, good. Tier 8, good. Tier 7, good. Tier 6, good. Like, they're not exceptional tanks. Like, they don't do anything really, really, really well. They're not like, you know, STB1 kind of DPM or anything like that. But they just have good all-round stats. And you can't really go too wrong with them. And I think that even for a beginner, you could go down this line and you wouldn't feel like you're ever at a disadvantage. Because as long as they're fully upgraded, because obviously if you're stock, no matter what tank you're in, it's going to be a problem. Unless it's 65T. But we'll get onto that later. The Centurion Action 10 is really nice. And if it's your first tier 10, honestly, I wouldn't say it's that bad. A lot of people hate on it just because it's not the best tank in the game. But for learning how to play mediums, this is actually not that bad. Manticore line, do not go down it. It is not worth it. You have no DPM. You don't even have as good camo as an EBR. I don't understand. It's just, I haven't even gone down it. There's no point. What is the point of me going down this line? Seriously. The Manticore is okay. However, it gets a stupidly long reload. You get no DPM, and it's quite poor accuracy for what it is. And considering that the whole premise of this tank was that it had good alpha damage, the WZ light tank gets the same. The Sheridan gets the same. So I don't feel like this is even worth it, even for experienced players. I mean, if you've got nothing else to grind, then maybe, but I'll just enjoy the game before you go and try and do that. Okay, moving on to the German tech tree line. Jagdpanzer 100. I don't recommend it. Just because these are okay. Jagdpanzer 4 is okay as well, I guess. Jagdpanzer from Ferdinand is awful. I'm sorry, it's just slow, it has no armor. Jagdtiger's nice because it can be kind of troll, but as soon as you fire heat at it, it just gets obliterated. And yes, you do get really, really nice DPM, but that doesn't make up for the fact that it's slow and it doesn't have armor, realistically. So I wouldn't recommend going down this line until later on. Grille 15, on the other hand, though, this line is insane. You get the best tier 9 TD, in my opinion, and the Grille 15 itself, honestly, the WT is probably better than the Grille 15. I'm not going to lie to you. I mean, if we just compare the two, right? By default, it loses, what, 3 pen? And then with premium rounds, the situation gets even weirder. So it goes to 334 heat rounds with 750 alpha. But then the WT, if you use the correct gun, which I would say is the 12.8 centimeter one, you get some of the best premium rounds I've ever seen in a tank. It gets 352 millimeters of APCR pen. And that APCR goes at 1.5k shell velocity. Like, it's really good. So, considering the fact that even the heat rounds, like the heat rounds that are good, go at 900. 1.2 for the standard rounds are really nice, but I don't know. I mean, you won't need to be firing that many premium rounds, but when you do, it's going to be really, like, the difference in the speed is going to be mental. I don't know, it's up to you. I would keep the WT, because the WT is really nice. But the Borsig is really good, the Struer Mill is really good, and the National's really good as well. And these two, as I said, they're okay. You can just get through them. You're not going to spend too long on tier 4 and 5, so that's not really like a deal breaker. Panzer 7, do not go down this line. The tier 9's okay. Actually, the tier 9's quite good. The tier 8 is not that good, in all fairness to it. I feel like this tank needs an actual buff. This is a little bit... yeah, but the tier 10, you can just pen in the turret, so I don't know. The line itself, though, is not... it's not too bad. It's definitely not one to just avoid. I would stop again at the tier 9, because the tier 10 is just a bit... I don't know. It's just a bit weird. It has so many weak spots, and in places that you just shouldn't have weak spots. Like, if you're facing one of these things, you can genuinely just go straight through the gun. Like... I mean, where my mouse is right now, if it's facing you, just pen it there. It's unreal. It's only like 250 millimeters thick. And if it's trying to side scrape against you, you can just go and pen it here. I will say that it is kind of bait when you can go around the corner and try and shoot it on a lower plate, because it will just bounce. Like, this lower plate is about 280 millimeters thick to 300. So this can be really, really troll. So yeah, don't shoot it in the lower plate. Even if it's head on at you, it's probably not a good idea. But I mean, the gun is okay. The gun is actually really good for a German tank. 258 standard rounds for penetration, and then 560 alpha with... it doesn't get good DPM, but you can get it to a manageable state with, you know, crew skills and equipment and stuff like that. But all in all, this line isn't terrible. It's just not one that I'd recommend at the start. The mouse line, don't do it. Just don't. At least not if you're new, okay? New players, avoid the mouse line, okay? You might think, oh, I really, really want a mouse. And then you get to the mouse and you're like, I don't want a mouse. The Moushian is the real big stinker in this situation. The Moushian is... well, if you... the problem is with the Moushian, you don't get the engine. And the stock engine is so slow. You have 7 power to weight with 20 kilometers an hour top speed. Considering that you also now have this thing, this radar dish on top of your tank, where if you meet people that are actually your tier, they can pen it easily. So it's just not really worth it, in my opinion. I mean, yeah, you do get the mouse's gun, which is nice, but... and I mean, the mouse is playable, even nowadays, but I just... I've never seen a tank at tier 9 that I've genuinely thought that's not worth it. It's almost worth to just stop at tier 8. Because this is like... this is as close to a mouse as you're probably going to want to go. This tank gets... okay, it's slow, but it gets some very, very good armor for tier 8. And a good gun as well. 440 alpha at tier 8 is nice. And it's got decent enough pen. 260 premium pen with 220 standard. It's okay. But yeah, the rest of the line, not too bad. A lot of people hate the Tiger P. I don't. Tiger P is fine in my opinion. And the VK31P is honestly a broken tier 6 tank. It actually is. It's like one of the best tier 6 heavies in the game. It got redesignated from being a medium to a heavy in one of the patches ages ago now. And with that, it is now one of the best tier 6 heavies in the game. It's so fast and just has everything kind of going for it. It's really good, actually. But you get 220 alpha at tier 6. Okay, it doesn't have great pen, but you know, you can just fire premium and go up to a 194 for premium pen. And then you go 45 forwards. Okay, it doesn't have the best specific power, but you can whack a turbo on this thing as well. So yeah, it has a lot going for it. The E100 line, yeah, I would go down it, even if you're a new player. They've actually made this line really nice now. I love the VK36-1H. I think this is one of the best heavy tanks at tier 6. Even though that it doesn't have kind of the best of gun choices, you get this gun, which is a 7.5/5.5 centimeter, whatever that means. You get some really nice penetration with this. You go from having 157 to 221 millimeters of pen at tier 6. Not to mention that it's accurate, it gets a good DPM. It's a nice tank, honestly. And then the Tiger, the Tiger's actually just beautiful. Even nowadays, it got buffed a little bit, I think, not that long ago. The Tiger is still a good tank. And considering that it gets a lot of hit points at tier 7, yeah, you can trade a lot, even with higher tiers. Because that 1.5k is around about, you know, tier 8 kind of heavy tank level. So you then whack that up to the Tiger 2. The Tiger 2 is beautiful. Yeah, it's one of those lines that is just, it just keeps getting better and better as you go on. Like, this tank's okay, this tank's good, this tank's good, this tank's very nice now. Ever since it got the buff, it's really, really good. And then the E75 as well, since that got the buff, it is just, like, all of these tanks in this line are really, really nice. And then the E100 getting the buff as well, so that its armor is much better. You can also use just the stock gun, because it has much more DPM, and is actually a lot more flexible than using the big gun. So I'd actually recommend you just stick with this one and then just unlock the next one whenever you do, because just play and have fun with it. E50M. I'm not going to lie to you. Don't go for the E50M, just get the E50. The E50M is, it makes no difference. It has exactly the same DPM as the tier 9. Because you get, I mean, the only reason why you would go up to the E50M is if you want a little bit more HP and you want that kind of tier 10 matchmaking. But then at the same time, you're always going to meet a tier 10 on the other team. So at least with the E50, sure, you don't get heat rounds as your premium, and your kind of penetration does lack a little bit. I believe it's about 220 on the standard and 270 on the premium. 230 on the standard and 270 on premium rounds. And a lot of people will just fire premium rounds because that's what you should do, realistically. You could go for the smaller gun and your alpha is going to go down quite a bit, but it's not unplayable. But realistically, just go for the big gun, the 390 alpha, and fire some premium as and when you need it. But the E50 line is really nice. Even the Panther 2 and the Panther and the VK32M, they're all really good. They're not great, but they're good enough. And then you move on to the Leo line. Now, the Leo 1, beautiful tank, as we all know. Leo PTA, fine, beautiful tank, once it's fully upgraded. Indian Panzer. VK32D, that's okay. These two are... The Indian Panzer isn't unplayable. The Indian Panzer is just okay all round. It's definitely not good all round. And you will be getting into situations where you're really hating the tank at times. But when I was going and playing it on the grind series, you can see some of the games, and I played it stock and then moved up through it, and it was just awful to play stock. But pretty much every tank is awful to play stock. Once you get this gun though, things do improve for you. You do get much more DPM and decent penetrations, so it's not the end of the world, and I'd still recommend you go down the Leo line at some point, but I wouldn't make like the E50 line and the Leo line your guaranteed first lines to go down. The Rhm Pzw is okay. It's not great. I would advise other light tanks first rather than this. It's your typical kind of light tanks, so if you want to learn light tanks, I wouldn't recommend you go down this line first. Okay, let's go on to the American line, the E3 line. It's not bad. It's actually not. Is it new player friendly? Probably not, because you're going to have to learn a lot about the game and how different mechanics work and kind of stuff like that and where to go. So I wouldn't recommend it as your first kind of tank destroyer line to go down, But once you understand about the game a little bit more, then it's actually really, really good. Because you need to learn about the different playstyles of tank destroyers. Assault TDs, which are like these, you obviously got the T28, the T95, and the E3. All three of these are really, really good for what they're meant to do, which is being kind of frontline and, you know, brawling with other tanks and stuff like that. But they're slow, and if they get caught out, you're probably going to die very, very quickly. So that's why I say I don't recommend it at the start, but once you understand the game a little bit more, then yeah, that's a good line. The E4, exactly the same kind of thing. These are again kind of assault TDs. You don't play them at the back of the map. You play them more like heavy tanks. Because these all have turrets on them, you can just play them as heavy tanks and just think, okay, that is what I am. The T28 is really slow, so you're going to have to take that in consideration, like halfway through the line. T30 is a little bit faster, and the E4 is slow as well, but not dramatically slow. They do all have some form of armor, especially the T30. The T30 does get a nice turret, but you will be able to pen it, especially at tier 9 now. That turret is going to be, well, especially if they fire premium at tier 9 and 10, then your turret's not really going to last very long. And the same goes for the E4. The E4 does have the weak spot on the cupola and kind of the cheeks on the tank as soon as they fire heat at them. So E4 compared to E3, the E3 is much better, but learn about the playstyle first and then go down these two lines. Okay, the E5 line. This one's not a bad one to go down first, actually. You go and get the T6 medium, which is just funny. Then you go and get the T1 heavy, which is okay. And then the M6, which again is okay. One thing that I will say is if you're going to go and get the M6, then make sure that you go all the way through and get this 90mm gun, because it makes the T29 grind a lot easier. Because otherwise you're going to get to the T29 and then be stuck with this 76mm gun. And yeah, the difference between the two is quite a bit. So I would really recommend you do that. And then you can move on to T32, which is a great tank actually. Really, really nice tank. The M103, which is not the greatest, but it's okay. It's definitely not a tank that you think is just completely useless. It's about like a 5, 6 out of 10. Kind of tank. And then the E5 is really, really nice. This is like an 8 out of 10 or even a 9 sometimes, just depending. Once you learn how to hide your cupola and stuff, it's a really good tank. T57 heavy, not something I recommend you go down at the start. This requires, it's obviously an autoloader, the same with the T69 and the T54E1. All of these are autoloaders, so you need to learn about how those work, especially in heavy tanks. It's very, very different from medium tanks. You need to know about situations where you can go and hide once you've done your burst, and you know when to run away and when to kind of stay in cover and get your next burst out. So it does take a lot to kind of understand about the game. So keep that in mind, and I wouldn't recommend these as first tanks. The Patton, on the other hand, this is a brilliant line. This is exactly like the Centurion line. Somewhat better in some respects. They get a little bit worse accuracy, but a bit more DPM in most of the cases than the Centurion line. So the M4, really nice tank. The M4, the EZ8 is really nice as well. T20 is good. Pershing, a good all-round tank. You really want that at tier 8 because, like the Centurion, this is just a solid all-round tank. If you have a tank at tier 8 and it's not very good, you really, really don't like the grind. Because tier 8 is going to be where you're spending a lot of your time. Tier 8 and tier 9 are where the XP sinks really start to sink in. So you're going to want a nice tank at tier 8 and 9. And this line has it. The M46 Patton is honestly probably one of the best tier 9 mediums. It kind of gets forgotten about because it's so old, but it's one of the best tier 9 mediums in my opinion. And then the M48 is just a solid all-round tier 10. Sheridan, you can just kind of troll with this. Again, this is not really a good line to start your light tanks off with. Because the Sheridan gets, like the Manticore, well, this is a 105. But 390 alpha damage gun. And then it can also get a derp gun, which is just kind of for the memes and stuff like that. So it's not really a proper light tank because you can kind of exactly the same with the T49. The T49 gets the derp gun as well, which you'll get on the Sheridan. So you don't have to unlock it if you've unlocked it on the T49, which you're going to have to if you actually want to unlock the Sheridan. But both of them get the derp guns, and so you can kind of troll people with them and do like 900 damage with HE and stuff like that. It's not really the first line that you go down to be a light tank. or at least to learn how to play light tanks. They're quite fat and don't have a lot of camo in comparison to the others, and they're not especially fast either. Okay, moving on to the French tanks. The Foch B. No, do not go down this line. This line is just not worth it. The Foch B is... It's one of those tanks where if you want to do really well in it, you just load premium rounds only. Because you get APCR as I nearly said as standard, as your premium rounds, and then AP as your standard rounds. So for those of you that want to do super well in it and not have to kind of worry about, oh, does the situation need this? Does the situation need that? Especially as an autoloader that has a lot of shells, because this tank has, I think, 6 shells in the magazine? Yeah, 6 shells in the magazine with 2-second intra-clip reload, and it's 36 seconds to reload all of those shells. And they all have 400 alpha. And you might say, okay, that's great. And 257 pen is fine most of the time. But when you have those shells, and the penetration on the premium rounds are 325 millimeters a pen, you want to just have the 325 millimeters pen. Like, it's just as simple as that. Like, why would you have 6 shells with kind of 257 when you could be pumping out, like, so much more damage because you know that you're going to pen as long as you aim your shells? So, I don't know. It can be a very expensive tank, but for people that don't want to fire premium, I suppose it's okay as well. But the shell penetration, as it's a TD especially, isn't very high. I mean, a 279E gets the same pen. It actually gets more pen. It's kind of heavy tanks of the same tier get more standard pen than the Foch B. So it can be quite expensive. But overall, it takes so much to learn how to play these tanks properly that I just wouldn't recommend it. And not to mention, you have the ARL V39, which is probably one of the worst tanks in the game. As you can see, the gun goes off my screen nearly, but its gun arc is, well, I mean, you see this, I guess this would be the driver's hatch or something like that. You see that hatch there? That's about how far the gun will turn. It's awful. It has like a 0 gun arc. It is so bad. It's just useless. And it gets a really weird gun as well with the ARL, because you can go and use premium rounds, which increases the pen and increases the damage. But yeah, overall, just avoid this line until later on, of course. 50B line, again, avoid it for your first time, but once you know how to play these tanks, these are really, really fun, actually. These are some of the most fun you can have in the game. But you do need to know how to play an autoloader. As it is a heavy tank, it's a bit different from a medium tank and stuff like that, and you can be punished so hard for playing these tanks wrong. If you make one mistake, sometimes that's enough to just destroy your tank entirely. You have no armor, or at least assume that you have no armor. The 50B actually gets some really weird armor. If I go and preview, get some really weird armor down here. This is about like 400 millimeters thick at times, or 350, stuff like that. If they shoot this, they're going to bounce. So you can actually bait people around the corner sometimes and get them to shoot this, because what they're going to shoot. And if they shoot there, they bounce, and then you can just go around the corner and kill them. But it takes a lot to try and work out how to play this tank, at least very effectively. So I wouldn't recommend this for beginners, but once you get the hang of it and your understanding of the game is increased, these can be a lot of fun. No, don't go down this line, okay? I'm telling you right now. This tier 10 is poo. The tier 9, really good, actually. If you're going to go down this line, though, just stop at the tier 9. Don't go for the tier 10. And the tier 8 is... How can I put this nicely? Nope, I can't. If you've got nothing nice to say, then just don't say it at all. This tank is awful. It's better off stock than it is upgraded. So what happens is that you upgrade the turret, and it goes from this, which is actually not too bad for the turret. You can kind of, you know, bounce a few things here and there. Obviously, you got the cupola. This is the cupola. This is the turret for the AMX Liberté and stuff like that. As soon as you click this, what is that? It's awful. This thing goes from being kind of hard pen-ish to just being, shoot me. I mean, at least you get the better gun if you have the turret. But even then, it's not even a better gun. Hang on. It's a worse gun. Just don't get this tank, okay? Don't get it. It's not worth it. don't go anywhere near this line. Okay, even the tier 5 and the 6 are awful as well. The tier 7's kind of bad, but you can go through it. And the tier 4 only gets tier 4 matchmaking. It doesn't meet tier 5s. I'm not joking. Ooh, the bat chat. Ooh. If you know what you're doing, I'm going to say exactly the same thing as the 50B here. If you know what you're doing, go for it. It's a good line to learn how to play autoloaders. I will say that. So if you only really learn autoloaders once you know about the base of the game, because autoloaders can really mess with your mind if you kind of are just learning about the game. So go down these once you have a bit of experience in the game, but for first times, no. This tank line is really nice. Oh, man, the problem is that it's really, really good for learning light tanks. But would I recommend it as the first light tank line? Probably not. Simply because they're autoloaders. I mean, no, actually, you know what? For light tanks, no, you can kind of get around that. Because for light tanks, you can learn when to shoot. And autoloaders are not really going to affect kind of the light tank gameplay as much as medium tank gameplay does. So having an autoloader, it doesn't really put you as a disadvantage and stuff like that. So this line, not too bad for learning how to play the game, especially the fact that you get your ELC AMX here and the Batchat, the AMX 12T. Both of these tanks are really, really nice for learning. So tier 5 and 6 are good. Do not go down the EBR line. Just don't. You go down this as like the last kind of line that you ever do in a light tank, honestly, if you're learning the game. Again, if you know about light tanks and stuff like that, then you can just go straight for the EBR. But if you're new to the game, don't go and choose an EBR, because yes, they're kind of broken and OP and stuff like that, but you're going to need a lot of equipment and you're going to spend a lot of money playing this. Like my EBR, I have Bond, vents, Bond optics, and then I have CVS, and I'm using food, and my view range is 463 meters. And I have a directive. The EBR is going to cost you a lot to set up if you want to get as much out of it as you possibly can. And the more that you do, like, this is the one tank kind of thing that needs bonded equipment. So don't go down the EBR line. Just don't. Do that last. China. As you can see, I haven't really gone down these, but I actually quite like them. I just haven't had the time to kind of do it. The TD line is good. Do you know what? Yeah, screw it. If you enjoy it, if you enjoy some TD gameplay, do it. All of these are pretty good. You get really, really nice alpha as well. Like you get a tier 10 gun on the tier 8 with 271 pen and 560 alpha, and then you move up to tier 9, which is arguably better than the tier 10. You get really, really strong frontal armor, and obviously a ridiculous gun. You get 290 millimeters of pen with 390 heat rounds. This is like a 268 in a tier 9. So yeah, really good tank actually. And then you go to tier 10, which is just the same thing but slightly less reload. So you get a little bit more DPM out of it and stuff like that. So you can't really go wrong with this line. Even these kind of starting off tiers are not too bad. They're your typical kind of TD gameplay tanks. So if you do enjoy TDs, or you want to learn about TDs, then I would still say the Grille 15 line is probably your best go-to line, but you can't really go too wrong with this. The 5A line, yeah, it's actually great. You go from the IS-2, which is your first heavy tank, and then you can move up to the 110, which are both very, very solid tanks. Tier 9, this is actually probably one of the best tier 9 heavy tanks in the game. It gets really, really nice DPM, still has good turret armor, and does have a nice gun as well. So overall, this line is actually really, really nice. So I'm probably going to end up going down this, maybe at Christmas or something like that. I'm working my way down the Tiger 2 and going for the E100 and stuff at the moment in the IS-4. But yeah, all of these lines actually are good, apart from the light tanks. So the 121, WZ-120, and all of these, they're okay. They suffer from the lack of gun depression, but they're fine. I wouldn't recommend you going down this as your first medium tank line. Avoid that. You could go down this as your first tier 10 heavy line. It's up to you. But do not go down the light tanks, because the light tanks are not good. Just don't do it. It's just not worth it. Although that, yes, they do get 390 alpha and they weigh quite a bit for a light tank. It's just, it's inaccurate. I don't know. It's just not good. Like, it doesn't even have good view range. Like, most of the other tanks have like 420 meters base view range. You know, this gets 400. Like, I have tier 8 premiums that have 410 base, like with the Hawk 30. So for a tier 10, and you don't even get, you know, 420 meters, I don't know. It just doesn't sit right. Not to mention you get no gun depression. You're not actually that fast. In reality, you only go at 65. So overall, I wouldn't really say that this is worth it to grind. Moving on to the Japanese tech tree. The heavy tanks are not worth it because this is just a heat magnet. This is a heat magnet. This is a heat magnet. Although the OHO isn't too bad, but it's just premium rounds will just fly at you and then you die. The OI is actually just funny. So you could grind up to tier 6 and then just call it a day there if you wanted to just have some fun in the game. So it's quite funny to play, especially with the big derp gun. As you can see here, 700 alpha. But you can also do 890 alpha with 75 pen with HE. And considering this is tier 6, you'll be able to pen quite a few people with 75 pen. So it's quite fun if you just do that. But I wouldn't recommend going and grinding all the way down. It's not that fun. STB1. This grind is actually nice. I was very, very surprised when I played this. The Cheeto is your typical kind of tier 6 medium. You go down it and it's just a good all-round tank. The Chivri is just a funny tank. It gets this weird kind of autoloader with 3 shells that have got 1 shot in between them. And it does 130 damage or 155 pen. And it's not too inaccurate either. It's actually a nice tank to play. And it even has like these weird kind of machine gun ports coming out the side. Like coming out the side here. I don't know what's going on exactly, but I mean, if they attack from the right hand side, they're screwed. But if they attack from the left, don't worry, Mr. Well, I mean, maybe it's a cold day, but you know, he's got it. He's got it covered. The SDA1, your standard kind of tier 8, it's just a good all-round tank, and the Type 61, again, it's just a good all-round tank. If you don't like the suspension of the STB1, I know this is wrong to say. You might actually prefer to play this tank than the STB1. If you don't like how the suspension works. And I know some people don't. And also, I mean, look at it. It's actually just a beautiful looking tank. It's probably one of the best looking tanks in the game, actually. At least in my opinion. You have some really, really troll kind of upper hull armor and then really nice turret as well. Yes, you do get a cupola, but you got to have a cupola because this thing is actually balanced, unlike some of the other tanks. And then the STB1, the highest DPM in the game for a medium tank. Yeah, what's more to say? Like, this thing is really, really good, but it does suffer from having this weird suspension, and I would prefer it if they just remove the suspension entirely. Would I recommend it as your first line to go down? You know what? It's not bad. And you will learn with the STB, but you also learn with the Type 61 how to play medium tanks. So I wouldn't say that it's a bad choice. It's not too bad. And I do understand that this video is getting on a bit, but if you are enjoying, feel free to subscribe because I'm already an hour into recording this. Hopefully it's not that long by the time that I've edited it all down. But yeah, if you do enjoy, then make sure you leave a like and subscribe on the video, yeah? Okay, anyway, Czechoslovakian tanks. TVP, actually really good tank. And so is the tier 9, let's go to T50. But the tier 8 and the tier 7, the tier 7 is not too bad actually, but the tier 8 is one of the worst tanks in the game. And I wouldn't recommend you go down this first. Again, these two are autoloaders, but you can really punish people with these two tanks being autoloaders. They play a little bit differently from the Batchat because the Batchat is kind of, you have a little bit longer for the intra-clip reload, whereas this is literally like you're going to pump out 1,000 damage and then just run away. Within, I think it's like 1.5 seconds intra-clip reload for the TVP, so times that by 4 and then you just run away. You know, it's really, really good. But I wouldn't recommend these as your first kind of tanks. And also, the same thing applies for the VZ. The VZ line, I can't really comment on because I haven't played these kind of in any regard other than on the test server. However, I know for a fact that this thing is mental. But that doesn't mean that the rest of the line is necessarily any good. And these are, I would just say, okay. Would I recommend these as the first tanks you go down? No. Because they're autoloaders, or at least once you get to tier 8, it's an autoloader. But funny thing about the tier 8 having the autoloader, you might not actually want to play it, because if you use the autoloading version, you don't, like, look at the aim difference, the dispersion difference in the aim time. That's mental. The only problem is that you can't put a gun rammer on it, so yes, you're going to lose out some DPM, but I don't know, it depends if accuracy is more worth it to you. And then the tier 9 is fine. Like, it's just that it's good, but not your first tanks that I would recommend. Right, moving on to the Polish lines. The 60 TP. Yeah, I'd recommend this, actually. This is a very, very good line to just start out with. The 60 TP is very forgiving, and so is the rest of these lines. The 53 TP is actually probably one of the better tier 8s as well. You do get that, I think it's 440 alpha. It's 420 alpha that you get. And you get a decent turret, decent hull armor. Yeah, you can't really go too wrong with any of these tanks in this line. They're all really solid vehicles. Yeah, I'd recommend this. Now, for the CS63 line, I don't recommend this for new players because the CS53 is actually a bit of a stinker, and the CS44 isn't great. But the CS59 is great, and so is the CS63. However, the CS63 does get the turbocharger kind of ability where it will go a lot faster in turbo mode, and you can switch out of it, and it takes 2 seconds, and you've got to be standing still and stuff like that. So I wouldn't recommend this as the first line that you go down for mediums, but for more experienced players, this would be a lot of fun. Okay, so the Swedish line. STRV. Don't go down this if you're a new player. I'm just going to say that right now. This is not the line that you want to go down as your first line. It's just not. STRV is very, very... You need to know about the mechanics and how they work. And if you don't know how they work, you can get caught out very easily and then just die. Exactly the same thing goes for the Kran. I don't recommend this as a new player because if you're a new player, you're going to probably die with it quite easily in comparison to a more forgiving tank. Especially the fact that it's an autoloader, you're just going to end up kind of firing all your shells. And then if you're not in a situation where you know what you're doing, you can run away, then you're just going to die. And to get there, you're going to have to play for a few tanks which aren't necessarily very good. The Leo is not that good, and the Emil 1 is... It's okay, but it's not great, because the Emil 1 suffers from its turret armor being very, very, let's say, malleable. As soon as you fire heat at an Emil 1, it pretty much just disappears. It doesn't really have any armor. I'm not going to lie to you. And the same thing kind of goes for the UDES line as well. It's just not really worth it as a new player. Once you understand the game more, then these lines are great. Like, you can really start to enjoy them. But these two tanks, okay, these two are poo. This one is okay. But these two, they are something else, okay? The UDES 16 is probably the worst tier 9 medium tank in the game, in my opinion. It's so bad. I hated it so much, I actually sold it while I was grinding it and just used free XP to go and get the UDES. I really hated this tank. And the UDES 14, it's tier 8. You can kind of be forgiven because it's not meant to be super good, but it's still not a good tank. Not compared to other tanks like a T44, for example, or stuff like that. It's just not. Moving on to the Italian lines. Rinoceronte. No! Just no! Even if you're the most experienced player known to man, okay? Don't go down this line. It's just not even worth any credits or XP that you want to go and use. It's right, this is the line. You ready? Poo, poo, okay, poo. That's the line. Enjoy. Progetto 65, not that bad. Actually, decent tank once you get an understanding of it. The Solar B is also really nice. But since I removed the gun rammer from these tanks, they've been a bit kind of lackluster. I have no idea still where they got the idea that these were overperforming. But they went from being really, really nice tanks to just being kind of, right. I don't recommend anyone to go down this as the first line. I mean, I don't recommend anyone to go down this line at all, no matter how experienced you are. But once you're a little bit more experienced, then maybe you can try these out. Okay, now moving on to the bias lines. Yeah, as you can see, there's so many in here that I've had to move my webcam over the other side. I purposely done this last because there are the most in this tech tree. and the most I'd actually recommend you do. Most of the Russian lines are pretty good, and you can't really go wrong with any of them, apart from a few. Now, starting off with the 268v4, I don't recommend you choose this as your first line that you go down. If you want a tank destroyer, I'd recommend the 268, because this line is really good. You've got the ISU, the SU, and the Object 704, and then you get the SU 100, the SU 85. Do you know what? Even the little T60 is good, okay? All of these line, the whole thing, okay, is beautiful. And you can even go from the KV1 up to the almighty KV2 to get the SU-152, which is actually what I done first of all. No, it's not. That's a lie. I went down the SU-100. Bad Max. Anyway, so 268v4, I don't recommend you go down, not for the first kind of new players and stuff like that, but the 268, the standard one, yes. It has good enough armor where you can kind of, you know, bounce some shells now and again, and that applies to kind of all of these tanks as well. And you get some really, really nice guns. Like, once you get the ISU, you get access to the, it used to be the BL-10, but then they removed it because they thought, oh yeah, you know what? That tank might be a little bit too good. And then basically replaced the gun with something that is the same gun, which makes 0 sense. Well, actually, Max, it makes perfect sense, because what they done was got this tank. Ta-da! Oh, look, the BL-10's back. It's the BL-10A. Anyway, you get a really nice gun on the ISU, and then you get the BL-10, the actual BL-10, as you can see here, on the tier 9, and this gun is just a meme, because it gets such good pen as standard, and good premium pen. It's just beautiful, and it's actually really well armored. So this tank, I recommend. I recommend every single one of these tanks. They're really good. Moving on to the 277 and the IS-7. I recommend, and I'm not joking here, every single one of these tanks. Okay? Maybe not the T28. I don't like the T28, but that's besides the point. It's low tier. It's fine. But T10, 277, IS-7, 257, IS-3, IS, KV-1S, KV-1. All of these tanks are just beautiful. Okay? You can learn how to play heavy tanks in any of them. And no matter which way you go, the 277 is maybe a little bit more towards the kind of more experienced player. So it depends, because this is a lot faster, and also the T10 in the same respect. It's a lot faster and has a little bit of a better gun, rather than the 257 and the IS-7. So it's up to you which one you go down, but either of them are just really good, and I recommend anyone to go down these. The 705A line, I don't recommend new players to go down, but if you do know about side-scraping and how it works, these things are monsters. The IS-4, kind of the same thing as the 705. I don't recommend new players to go down these. However, if you know about side-scraping, you can make an IS-4 side-scrape really, really well, and a KV-4 as well. ST2, again, I don't really think that new players should be doing this, but if you know what you're doing, then this can be a good line. The IS-22 is not that good. It also gets wonky guns. Why are they not straight? But besides that, really good tanks in this line overall. Once you go to the IS-32, it's probably one of the best tier 9 heavies in the game. The ST2 isn't that good, but it's more than good enough. So if you're a little bit more experienced, then you can go for these kind of lines. This IS-4 and the ST2, it depends on what you want kind of out of your tanks and stuff like that. Moving on to the medium tanks, the 430U is a good tank. However, I don't recommend people to choose it if you're trying to learn how to play mediums, because this is more of a heavy tank than a medium tank. It's heavium is what we would call it, because it's kind of like a heavy medium put together. If you want to learn how to play medium tanks though, 140 and this line is really, really good for learning. You need to be careful of the T54 though, because you don't get a lot of pen, but you do get a lot of pen on your premium rounds. So you can kind of be caught out in that respect. You could use the gun that has a little bit more penetration, and you do get a lot more dispersion, so it's a lot more accurate, but it doesn't have as good kind of rate to fire and DPM and stuff like that. So it's up to you which one you choose. But the 140 is a really nice tank to learn how to play medium tanks in, and the entire line is quite forgiving overall. K91 I wouldn't recommend people to go down, especially not new players. It's just not really worth it. And the T100 LT finally is probably the best light tank line that you can start with. It's It's not forgiving because light tanks are never really forgiving, because if you get spotted, you're gonna die. But it gives you tanks that are good enough to spot passively and spot aggressively and actively. So you can kind of learn how to play those tanks, and also you get a gun that works on them, unlike some of the other tanks where the tank is a light tank and it just thinks need to scout. Whereas this, you can actually be kind of, you know, going into brawls with other tanks, especially other light tanks, and you'll more than likely come out as the winner in those brawls. Yeah, lots of good tanks in this. Some of them, you know, you shouldn't, but yeah, overall, really nice. So, thank you very much for watching. I know it has been a very, very long video. And if you did watch all the way through, then I thank you very, very much. If you did enjoy, then make sure you leave a like and subscribe. It took me a long time to make, and I haven't even started editing it yet. Well, obviously for you, it's already up, but yeah, I've probably spent about 3 hours just recording this alone. So, yeah, hopefully you enjoy, and I'll see you all in the next one.